To understand state changes, we first have to understand the relationship between heat energy and kinetic energy. In simple terms, when a substance gains heat energy, it gains kinetic energy. This is simply a law, since heat energy transfers into kinetic energy. However, to make it easier to understand, let us put it this way. Everyone knows when you gain heat energy, the temperature also increases. Well, temperature is just the average kinetic energy of the substance, so its kinetic energy increases. Now back to state changes. State changing is when a group of particles in one state transform into another state. There are 6 different ways of changing: freezing, melting, evaporation, condensation, sublimation, and deposition. Change in volume. For example, when a liquid turns into a solid, there is a change in volume. When it becomes a solid, it occupies
usually less space.
This is because of density. The solid is denser than the liquid, which is denser than the gas. In solid state, the particles are close together with tiny gaps, whereas in liquids, the particles are close but not far away. In gas state, the particles are very far apart, therefore the amount of volume it occupies is larger.
This explains why gases are compressible, but liquids and solids are not.
Water expands when frozen. It's because of its unique crystal lattice when solid. The lattice actually holds the water atoms further apart than they are in liquid state, which makes it less dense. This in turn leads to the water in the solid state occupying more space than it does in the liquid state, so its volume increases when it's frozen. Freezing is when a liquid turns into a solid. This happens through heat energy being removed from the liquid. This in turn leads to the substance losing kinetic energy, causing the liquid particles to slow down. If the removal of heat and kinetic energy continues, the liquid particles will eventually get into a fixed position and start vibrating on the spot. Melting is when a solid turns into a liquid. As more heat energy gets added to the solid, the particles move faster and faster until some bonds break, but some stay together, causing the particles to slide past each other. Condensing is when gas turns into liquid. This happens when warm gas comes in contact with a colder surface. The gas particles loses heat energies and thus no longer has enough kinetic energy to overcome the attraction. This causes it to form bonds and to become a liquid. Evaporation is when liquids become a gas. When more heat energy gets added to the liquid, the particles' movement speeds up, which in turn breaks the bonds of the particles. Breaking the bonds makes the gas particles zoom around and bounce off any surfaces they touch, therefore filling wherever the gas is contained in. The longer the liquid is heated, the more gas it will create and the less liquid there is. Here are some similarities about evaporation and boiling. Evaporation occurs on the surface and it is slow with no bubbles. Whereas in boiling, there is a bubbling effect and it occurs on the entire substance and it is much faster. But both occur when a liquid turns into a gas. During evaporation, the liquid particles become gas particles and the liquid loses volume. This is because the liquid particles on the surface are gaining energy and becoming gases. The particles underneath the surface have a moderate amount of energy that transfers their energy to the particles on the surface. The particles then have enough energy to overcome their bonds and break free. After a while, quite a bit of the liquid particles has become gas particles. Sublimation is when a solid turns into a gas without going through liquid state. An example of sublimation is the vaporization of dry ice at normal atmospheric pressure and temperature. Sublimation happens more easily when air is warm and dry, but a temperature below freezing point. The particles in solids absorb enough energy to completely overcome the force of attraction between each particle. Deposition is when a gas turns into a solid without going through the liquid state. Energy is quickly released from gas, which causes the particles to slow down and form a solid. An example of deposition is when water vapor in the atmosphere changes directly into ice in the formation of frost. In this experiment, the particles begin in a solid state, ice. The particles vibrate and have strong bonds that hold the particles together. The attraction is extremely high. After a few minutes, as more heat energy is added from the fire coming from the Bunsen burner, the solid becomes a liquid, and the particles are now sliding around each other. This process is called melting. The attraction between liquid particles are medium.
another few minutes, the bonds between the last of the liquid particles break as they gain more heat energies and thus kinetic energy.
After another few minutes passing by, the liquid becomes very bubbly at the top. This means that it has boiled. When water reaches its boiling point, it becomes water vapor. This is called evaporation. The attraction between the different particles becomes very low, and the particles zoom around the room.